I wrote an article about it. It's like, stop hiring for culture fit.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, if you interview somebody that you really want to have a beer with, go have a beer with them. That's perfectly fine.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to Truth Works, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change. I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Hey, Patty.
Yeah.
It's just the two of us.
Just the two of us. I love when we do just the
I
two
know.
of us once. It's like old times. It's like having lunch and
I know.
having somebody eavesdrop. It's pretty good. So you're sweltering.
Yeah, it's really hot here.
You know, Texas girls miss.
That's why I have like linen nothing on.
Yeah, well, we've got what we call in Santa Cruz June gloom.
Oh, yeah.
We kind of like it because it was Memorial Day and all the tourists in the world came down and played at the beach in the fog.
So nice.
Good for you.
So we're going to talk about hiring today, Patty.
I know. What I wanted to talk about was I thought I was like, way cool hiring chick because that was my background in tech was recruiting and I thought I was really good at it. And then I hired you because you were the best headhunter that we ever had. And I look back on it and I realized that I probably learned more from you about hiring than I learned from all the years I did it myself. You know, we both have a reputation for being people who hate process, right? And we hate policies and we hate all that kind of stuff. But we both love the discipline of a great recruiting strategy. And so I thought maybe we could talk about the things that were sacrosanct to us that really make a difference. And I think part of it came from the lessons I learned from you about being a headhunter, like show up on time, prepare for your interviews, ask everybody the same question so that you can calibrate, So I wanted to get into the depth of some of that. I have a very distinct methodology about thinking about recruiting, and that is that I ask people to say, hiring managers who, by the way, are the ones responsible for building great teams, not HR, not recruiting, but we'll talk about that in a sec, is I say, imagine in 6 months if you had an amazing team that everybody was just wowed by because they were doing such great work that made such an impact. And everybody was like, oh my God, that team is amazing. And in 6 months, if your team is amazing, then I say reverse engineer it.
Right.
Okay, then what would it take somebody to know how to do in order to accomplish this thing that's missing in your team?
Yeah.
Right. The other part is like if you work back and you say, okay, with the team I have and what I need to do in 6 months, what are my deltas?
Right.
Instead of more.
Right. Well, everybody always wants more.
Yeah. If I have 5 software engineers, 10 of them can do it twice as fast. Like, no, they'll actually be half as fast because
they're not any good. They're going to slow you down. No, I think, one of the things that intrigued me to go to Netflix, I'll just say this like from a headhunter perspective, by far, Netflix was the best client. And the reason why they were the best client was that they got that talent mattered, right? They didn't know how to go and find it always, but they knew it was important and they knew it was the most important thing to the strategy. So Netflix never let silly process or like we have to have 12 interviews or we can't,
You're right.
And so they never let that get in the way. They really catered the interviewing to the human, right? And we're fast and we're excited and met them with a whole experience that they wouldn't get at another company. And then they didn't lose people because of silly stuff, right? They didn't lose people because of $1,000.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I thought about as you were talking was that a lot of managers are new to hiring, right? And, you get promoted and it's like, go hire a team. They're like, oh, I don't know how to hire a team. And then to the fix my problem now, there's a lot of desperation that happens because there's deadlines to meet. And it's like
Yeah.
this person's, they know they're not great, right? But they're like, okay, they know
They're a warm
enough.
body.
Yeah, they can figure
Right.
some of this stuff out, and it'll be more helpful than not having anyone. And I mean, you and I know the truth that that's just not true. Like it is
Yeah, right.
more harmful than having no one, right?
Well, let's talk about some of the pragmatic stuff. Like, for example, so if you start with a problem that you're trying to solve,
Mhm.
right, that you don't have anybody on board to do it, what would it take for them to be able to do that in 6 months? And then you go to what kind of skills and experience would it take for somebody to be able to solve that problem in 6 months?
Right.
Right? Because most people start with writing out the laundry ticket. They'll need to have 5+ years of progressive management experience in marketing teams that deliver that, right? And everybody steals their job descriptions from
You just
everybody else. I mean,
copy-paste.
you just copy and paste. And so instead of, if you really hone in on what's the problem we're trying to solve in 6 months,
Right.
right? That's thing one. Thing two is you realize the reason you're hiring somebody is that nobody on your team can do it.
Right.
So then comes in I always say, this is the classic manager description of who you need. I need someone who's smart and quick on their feet, articulate, a good decision maker, someone charismatic, someone
Yeah.
just like me.
Just like me. Yeah.
Just like me. Only, a couple of years ago,
Right.
so they don't
Yeah.
want my job. And so like hires like.
Yeah.
And you realize at some point, and you can teach people this earlier, the last thing you want is somebody like you. You already got you.
Right. You want somebody that thinks differently than you.
Right. And when you focus on the problem,
Mhm.
I think when we get to diversity later, then you'll realize you don't really care, what degree they have or what school they went to or whatever. You just want to know, can they solve that problem? And is it a problem they're pretty excited about solving, which gets to your thing about I think the excitement came from the ability of the people that we're interviewing to go, this is really hard. We can't figure it out. Can you help us? And everybody loves to come on board and do that. The other thing I want to make sure that we get in the podcast is, we put together interview teams. The recruiters got together with the interview team before it even started. They talked about what the problem was, what the da-da-da-da. They figured out who was going to be on the interview team, who was going to ask what, so that somebody didn't end up at the end of the day going, yeah, I got the same interview 7 times over.
Yeah. No, true.
Right. And that nobody on the team that was interviewing was somebody that you're ready to get rid of. I can't believe how many people are, I'm like, well, why is Jessica on the team? Well, she wants to be. I'm like,
No.
well, we don't even want her to work here. Why is she? And then, I used to do all the final interviews. I'm like, so how did it go? What was your best experience? Well, Jessica hates it here, man. I changed my mind.
Yeah.
Why'd you put her on the?
No, you have to be super strategic. So I think let's talk at a high level, in terms of just what you were talking about, deciding the who,
Yeah.
who you want to hire. And I think your point is what's the problem I'm trying to solve, but not today, 6 months from today, and really
That's right.
think about that and hire for that. And you don't need the laundry list of you need 5 years experience and a degree for, really focus on the problem. And I think we lose sight of that a lot of times when we're writing these job descriptions or articulating it.
Or interviewing.
Yes. And then the thing we did at Netflix, which I always appreciated, and when I came in, we didn't have a lot of this strategy or process around it. But what was great was there was from the top, this is the most important thing we do. Right. So
Yeah.
at the top, it was talent is the most important. We don't care what you're doing. We don't care if you're in another meeting. All we care about is if we hire the best people. We don't know how to do it. Jessica does. Right.
Uh-huh.
And it was very liberating for me because the very senior leaders of the company listened. Right. And they're like, okay, we'll do whatever you tell me to do. And so we came in and we just set up an infrastructure to make a hiring machine, and a really good one, that didn't hire average people. It hired great people.
Yeah. And it wasn't an administrative paper pushing. You
No.
get, the number one thing to do was not get the rec approved.
Yeah. We never got Rex approved.
Well, I think about it sometimes. I used to have these endless discussions with the finance folks and say, look, head count, let's take that word and dissect it. Some of it's butt count.
Yeah.
How many chairs do we need at the time when we all came into the office, right? How many computers do we need?
Mm-hmm.
What sort of infrastructure? How big does a building need to be? Blah, 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 okay, butt count. Then there's head count budget,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in many companies, that headcount budget only includes regular full-time employees.
Mm-hmm.
And so, surprise, surprise, sometimes the budget goes over because you hired 2-to-1 in contractors,
Yeah.
right? And as far as headcount budget goes, that's part of it too.
Right.
Right. So whether somebody's going to work on a project for 6 months or somebody's going to be there for years, it still matters. The third thing was when you talk about headcount budget, you're talking about total salaries.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, and I don't know if Netflix still does that, I would be able to say, okay, do what you do. I want 5 of these and 3 of these and 2 of those and 6 of those. Put that all together, put a number on it, and then get that approved. And budgets should be as good as you can get,
Yeah.
right? And say 6 months out. And then say, wow, my budget was $500,000 for headcount, but I found this person who's incredible, who can move us forward a year, and their total comp is 450.
Yeah.
And everybody else is making 100. Like, now what do I do? And then you can have that compensation conversation, which is around not how to negotiate each individual salary, but what kind of talent do you need to build your team strategically going forward? And I think, what you brought to that, Jessica, was I remember there's all this mystery amongst the hiring managers. Well, but I want my favorite headhunter because headhunters know how to do really special stuff. And I'm like, no, they don't. That's just all they do. And they're better focused at it,
Yeah.
right? They don't give a shit about all the administrative stuff, right? You just come in and hire the best person. And that was like scales off people's eyes when you came in and brought that perspective,
Yeah.
which is, I'm not going to give you resumes where all the keywords match. We're going to together decide what kind of problem solver we need on the team. And that is hugely different. And I said we, because I think we created this thing where this is a team event hiring.
Yeah.
But the final responsibility is the hiring manager.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think that the things that we did well and that worked for us is that one, again, it was the most important thing that we did. And interviews, if you got asked to interview, that trumped a business meeting. And then the other thing that we did and that I sort of grew my team to do was to teach hiring managers how to hire because they didn't know, right?
Yeah.
And so they didn't know what great looked like. They didn't know how to network. They didn't know how to close. They didn't know how to interview. They didn't know any of those things. And so we sort of became like advisors and coaches to
For sure.
the leadership team and really designed a plan to help them get the best people on board. And when they weren't following the plan, whether it was, let's say, they weren't spending any time on reviewing resumes or they didn't have any time to interview, we said, okay, well, when you're ready, we'll work
Do
on
your
it.
thing.
Yeah.
I was just looking at the chapter in my book, and one of the stories is, hired somebody to run a huge part of the organization. We'll say marketing, right? And I overhear the recruiter saying, I've given him resumes. I've stood outside his doors. I've sent him 16 emails. I've made 3 meetings. He's canceled all of them. I don't know what to do. And I remember walking over going, work on somebody else's stuff.
Yeah.
He'll have a fit. He'll come down. He'll yell and scream. I'm like, that's all right. Just tell him I said so.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he's like, what the hell? Your people aren't coming through. And I said, did you in fact miss the meeting? Did you in fact, he's like, well, I can't do that because I'm busy doing the work of 10 people. I'm like, too bad, so sad, not my problem.
Right. Yeah. and not my team's
Right?
problem.
Like, and if you got a method that works better for you, fine. But I'm going to put this really talented person that I assigned to help you build a team on somebody else's team because they will grab her in a heartbeat.
Right. Right. And they'll do the work.
And by the way, she knows more about it than you.
Yeah. And I think the disservice, I'll say, that organizations do between recruiting teams and managers is that they do look at it as an administrative function versus a
A
strategic kind of
partnership.
partnership coaching function. And they're just, resume finders. And they organize the interview process and they make sure that the offer letters go out. And there's this kind of distrust or, they're just going to send
Oh,
me a
it's
bunch of
more
stuff.
than distrust.
Yeah.
It's like these are second-class citizens
Yeah.
that you don't really pay
Yeah.
attention to because they aren't really part of the business. They're just those, typically
Right.
chicks that do that stuff in the background,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I was just thinking about, so I'll talk about how you actually built your team because I thought it was fascinating. So I remember in the days you would hire like every anthropology, English major, new grad,
I love San Luis Obispo.
yeah, in our area to start out doing scheduling. And part of the reason they started out doing scheduling was it had to be somebody who could not only hold their own with an executive or their assistant in figuring out how, some executive vice president was going to find time to interview,
Yeah.
right? And be able to call somebody at home whose mom always answered the phone who didn't have English as a first language.
Yeah.
Right. And have the same integrity and good communication and respect for both of those constituencies and be able to put it together. So a lot of it was about organization, not getting internal approvals for shit.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the reason why I ended up having to do that, I don't know if you remember, but I had tried to hire senior recruiters for the team. And I was having a really hard time finding any that one understood great and two could influence a leader to make a
Yeah.
better decision. Right. So they were great at getting resumes, right? But
Yeah.
not great ones. And I always tell this to CEOs because they're like, oh gosh, I don't think my recruiting team's great. And I said, well, let me ask you this. When's the last time someone on your recruiting team said, don't hire this person? And they're like, never. Because they're just putting butts in seats. And if the hiring managers say they're good, then they say, great, let's go get them. Right.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find people that did that. So I had to go out and build them myself, which, I would start them out in scheduling and then they'd move to sourcing and then they might move to recruiting. Right. And I taught them how to do it.
Yeah.
And it was the only way that I could guarantee that we would get great people. Right. I didn't want internal recruiters. I wanted business people that influenced the organization to make better decisions and to do better hiring. And so I had to teach them how to do it from the ground up because these senior people that I had to pay lots of money to didn't know how to do that.
They knew how to find people.
Yeah.
That's the other thing I think that we learned over time. And there's a skill in doing that. Don't get me wrong. And there's a skill in networking. Like a lot of headhunters have great networks, right? And that's what you pay for. But, now God gave us LinkedIn. So we all have great networks. So the truth is you just want to be able to be good at that. But I think a bigger one is I have a Bethany story. I love to tell Bethany, somebody that Jessica and I both worked with forever. But we were going to do the Xbox. We had waited to try and get Netflix in the Xbox because it was a piece of hardware that was in everybody's living room. We get it, right? Do we have literally anybody that knows anything about this? No, zero, zip, none. No one in the whole company. So we have to build a team. And because it's hardware, it's like we have, 8 or 9 months to like D-Day and we have nobody to do it. So we say to Bethany, this is your job. Nothing else. You just build this team, right? And she searches hell and high water. And so what I love to tell the story is they're standing on the balcony and we're celebrating the launch of the Xbox, and the team, is raising their glass to toast. And one of them says, and thanks to Bethany for being part of the team and putting the team together. And I look over and she's all verklempt. And I thought, that's what makes this job so great. And she looked at me and she said, like, I built that team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. We always talk about what the manager's role is, but you want to have the person that's your partner and your
Well,
coach
yeah.
get just as excited about building your
Yeah.
team as you are.
Exactly. And I think our team, well, our recruiting team was more part of the teams that they worked for than they were our team. They spent more
Oh,
time
for
with them.
sure.
They were over in their area. They were sitting with them. They were with them all day. They went to all their
Yeah.
team offsites and dinners. And it's not to say that they didn't feel as connected to the recruiting team, but in many ways, not as strong because
Yeah.
they were more connected to these teams because they spent really a lot of time with all those people.
I mean, I remember telling people, look, honestly, you don't really care that much what I think of you. It's what who you work with thinks of you. And oh, by the way, you work with a lot of different kinds of people. So not everybody's going to be the right fit for everybody else. And that's fine.
Yeah.
And I think there's an important thing to say here too, which is how do you know they've built a great team? They get stuff done.
Right. Yeah.
Right. In 6 months, that problem got solved. You know why? Because the right people were on board.
Right. The other thing I'll say about recruiters is, I always get asked, like, how do you know about their performance? If they're a good recruiter or a bad recruiter, like we're mandating that they do this many phone screens and that,
right.
they have
cost per hire.
Yeah. And then we want so many people outside of our network, so many people inside of that. It's like, no, it's not to say that we don't look at those things as metrics, but do I judge their performance based on those things? Absolutely not. It may give me indicators to how they're doing. However, the thing that I judge their performance on is their ability to know the difference between good and great, because most of them don't, and their ability to influence the manager to make better decisions, saying, don't hire this person. They're not great. We're going to be opening up this role again in 3 months because you're going to fire them. Give me one more month and we'll find somebody better. Don't do it. And then the other thing is if the manager comes to me and says, I can't do my job without so-and-so, right? Like I could care less if they have, the least amount of phone screens. And by the way, they probably do because they know the difference between good and great and they're able to suss that out faster, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of organizations get that wrong. It's not how long, how many, because at the end of the day, I think you and I both believe in this. I'd rather hire slow and fire fast, right? And so if it takes us a little bit longer to find the right person, that's a not only better strategy, but that saves money in the long run because it costs a lot more money to hire the wrong people.
Yeah. And I guess I found that when we got larger and when I started consulting to larger companies and you're in smaller companies now, there's also a lot of conversation with hiring managers, even ones who've been doing it for a really long time. Like, who did you hire that turned out to be great? And rewind that and find out why.
Right.
And the other thing is the on paper great and the great in a particular environment is two completely different things.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because, people talk about that all the time and it's like dating, right? And you're dating this person and it's a great first date. You're like, oh, you got the butterflies in the tummy. You're like, they're kind of cute. I like them.
Yeah.
But then, when you get them in and they're actually doing the job, you're like, oh God, well, they're not that cute after all. Like they're kind of sloppy or they're,
Not only that, there was that endless, I wrote an article about it. It's like, stop hiring for culture fit.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, if you interview somebody that you really want to have a beer with, go have a beer with them. That's perfectly fine. Right. But you're not hiring them to be good bar companions.
Right. You're hiring them to get work done.
You're hiring them to get something done on your team. And oh, by the way, to be part of your team. That's the other part, which is, finding that. And it was often for us that we had to find some really rare. I remember interviewing a guy that worked for SETI.
I don't know.
Right? It's the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, right? Whatever. He had like 10 patents and 2 PhDs. And he's total geek. And I'm like, why on earth are you here? I mean, like, help me understand it. And like, we don't got aliens as far as I know. And he said, an infinitesimally large data set with a very small connecting problem. I'm like, huh? And he's like, so you have millions of customers and only a certain amount of content. And so you want to find those one-to-one matches, just like you want to find out in the universe. It's like, get out.
You're hired.
But that was the ability to wrap yourself around what in fact is the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, no, it's right. So let's talk some practical things. So one,
Okay.
hiring needs to be the most important thing.
Yep.
Right. Two, you have to put the responsibility on the manager. However, you have to have support from a great recruiting team.
Yep.
And your recruiting team has to be a partner to the business.
That's right.
They also have to know the difference between good and great.
And extraordinarily good at the discipline.
Yes.
Right. They need to make sure that, first of all, pick an interview team, name who's going to do it. What are they going to interview for? I always say put somebody on the interview team who has a track record of hiring great people, regardless of their function.
Right. No, it's true.
And I used to be the last interview of everybody. And somebody would say, like, I'm an engineer. Why am I talking to this stupid marketing person? I'm like, because they're on the schedule, talk to them. At the end of the day, like, wow, man, she asks really hard questions because this person had a track record of hiring great people, right? So that's second, then there's the little stuff. Always have a schedule. Always be on time.
Yeah.
Always have a close. If somebody doesn't work, if you got them scheduled for 9 interviews and by interview number 2, it's just wrong. It's okay. You can say, look, not now, but keep us in mind.
On that note, the thing you have to do really well is you want everybody walking out of the building wanting to work there.
I was about to say, even if we hate them.
Yes. We want them to want to work there. And so I think if you're building your interview experience off of that, like, should it be a mindless day of interview after interview after interview? Is that necessarily? Probably not.
Because great people are probably working.
Yeah. And is that going to make them want to work there? No. You want to have them meet, to your point, with the most impressive people, right? Who ask good questions, who can explain the business, who can also give you good, insights and data on whether you should hire this person or not. But you want them to feel amazing walking out that door. And so it is everything from when they walk in the door to the reception area,
to being on the sideline of their kids' soccer team saying, I interviewed at Netflix the other day. I didn't get the job, but man, these guys were on it.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other thing is, then if you decide they're the one, then don't dick around.
No.
I remember consulting to somebody in India, and they were competing with Yahoo for the same people, right? And they're like, what can we possibly do? How can we beat them? They're Yahoo. They got such a big machine. I'm like, well, here's the deal. In order for them to make an offer at Yahoo, they probably have 3 levels of approvals, and it's got to go through HR, and then it's got to the hiring manager, and then it's got to go through finance, and then they got to make an offer, and then it's got to be in range, and they got to do all this stuff, which takes them probably about a week
or more,
right? Or more. While they're doing that, while you could be doing that, they're sleeping.
Yeah.
So if you got it together and made an offer, like, they could wake up and go, what do you mean you took that?
Yeah.
If it's in budget,
you have to be,
it's the right person.
You have to be faster. And I think especially after, right? To your point, don't delay. And if you don't know and you need to interview some more, that's fine. There's also an art behind keeping the people you like warm and making them feel good, right? And you can, send them flowers.
Forget send them flowers. And we used to do tricks like that. But now it's like, I hear people, particularly now that we're doing so much stuff remotely, it's like, they ghosted me.
They never hear anything.
Right? I never heard from them again. And it's also important to teach people how to gracefully say no. So one more story. I'm interviewing this guy from Motorola. This is like back in the day when we were like streaming to the PC, right? And the whole time I'm interviewing him, he keeps messing with his flip phone. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, will you put that down? We're having an interview. And he's, opens it up and he goes, we'll watch movies on this someday. I'm like, yeah, bullshit. He goes, no, really, it's true. And I said, really? I'm like, this guy clearly, like, it was his deep passion, was video on the phone. And I said, Yeah, well, that's not happening for us, but it might. I mean, you could be right and I could be wrong. So you stay at Motorola and suck their brains about video on phones. And if should ever come to pass, I won't forget you, you won't forget me. And I hired him 4 years
Yeah.
later.
Yeah. I think that that's a great story too, is that just because it's not right now, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be right later. And, I think a lot of organizations, those folks go into an abyss, right? And there's no system to keep friendly with them, right?
Or the other side of the coin, which is, well, we'll do that someday. So we should hire you
Sure.
now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll have you do other shit that you don't care about at all for the next 3 years while we wait for mobile to be a reality, which is wrong too, right? Which is the other, like, why you want the time frame, because hiring somebody for the potential that they're going to have in 5 years when you need them to have that in 6 months, it's going to be a lose-lose for both people too.
And so back to the practicalities, I think, you've got to be fast, right?
Yep.
That makes people feel good. And you've got to be honest.
Yeah.
So you've got to tell them where they're falling short. You got to tell them what you love about them. And then if it's a no, you got to tell them it's a no, right? And you got to say, we really enjoyed it. It was really fun. However, it's just it's not a fit right now, but we want to stay in touch and actually try to stay in touch. If you really thought that they were good, they just didn't have that one thing that you needed in that 6-month time frame.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about this forever. Or the person who says, well, what are you going to offer me? Because Google offered me this and Facebook offered me this. And so which one are you going to match? And this is, again, have the recruiter, have the person, have the manager have the courage to say, are you waiting for the highest bid? Is that how you're going to choose? Then go to Google. They'll pay you the most. Right. Because we really want somebody who's really interested in solving this problem. And we want to pay you fairly. Don't get me wrong. Right. And if you were the only person on God's earth that could do it, we would probably match anybody. But,
you're not.
If what you want is the money,
go somewhere else.
Absolutely go to Google. They got it all.
Yeah, that's right.
Do I think you're going to be happy? That's not up to me. It's up to you. It's your life. It's your career.
Exactly. And I think you have to be honest about those things too. And then you got to hire people where they're drooling to solve the problems that you're solving, right? Like the guy flipping the phone, thinking about it, right? He's thinking about this problem in the interview with you. Yeah. He's looking at the phone. He's like, yeah, it's going to be. You want the people who are passionate about it. And if you get that ends up being pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty fun. And the joy, I guess, to shout out there for all of us who are in this role or part of it. Bethany was right. I mean, that joy of like seeing a great team that you help put together, do amazing work and feeling like you're part of it. Yeah. Then you're like, oh God, now what's next?
Yeah.
So that's the part about, how we always say we want people to be business partners. And, it's become such a cliche word to say. And what we mean is we want everybody to be excited about the business and success.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do like a part 2 of hiring, Patty, because it seems like we can talk about it forever.
Yeah. And I would say, we'd really appreciate response to this podcast because we've probably left a bunch of stuff out. And so if there's anything particular people want to know about, what we think about or particular questions about that, if we do it again, we can address some of those.
Absolutely.
Career confessions.
Okay. How do I attract a more diverse range of applicants? In the last few years, I've become more aware of how important it is to have a diverse and inclusive workplace, and I want to instill better values at my company. That being said, I've noticed that whenever we hire, we only seem to attract white men for the roles. I'm cautious of going about it the wrong way, but would love to know if there's anything we can implement to fairly make some changes. Patty, what say you?
It's called work, right? I remember talking to a group of startup CEOs, right? There was only like 50 people in the room. And one of them was like, well, I want to have more women on my technical team, but qualified women, don't cross my desk. And I'm like, really? Qualified men are walking across your desk? No, you know what I mean. HR is not giving me, good resumes of qualified women. And I'm like, okay, how many people on your company? 60. I'm like, yellow legal pad. Go sit down with everybody and said, who's the most amazing woman you've ever worked with? Write them down. Your recruiting team can go find them.
Yeah.
Bring them all in, all 60 of them, because there will be 60 of them. Interview them all, and absolutely you'll hire somebody.
Yeah. I think that's true.
Right? And the other thing is, like, the hard part is when you don't do anything about it for years and years and you got a bunch of nothing but white guys, then white guys hire white guys, hire white guys, and then people who are different walk in and go, ugh.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. I think if, you are trying to bring in diversity to the organization and people walk in and don't see anyone like them, they're not going to want to work there. But I think, back to this question though, there also has to be from the top an interest and dedication to this, right? And it sounds like that might not necessarily be the case for this person. I don't know what role they're in, but it really needs to be a strategy and a belief that from the top that we are better. We are a better business because we are more diverse. We are better because we don't have everyone that thinks the same, right? We are better because we have people from all over the world. And I think going back to your point, Patty, it really just takes dedication and hard work. If you dedicate your time to this and you spend your time differently than you normally do in recruiting, going different places, going different avenues, looking outside the box, you will be able to bring in more diversity. But it just takes effort. And it's a different effort than you normally make.
Yeah. And that's why I brought up earlier in our talk about hiring to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Because if you hire the person who you think would best solve the problem and it's somebody just like you, then you're going to end up with this groupthink. And so when you get to like who can solve the problem, then, and you really don't care, then you're going to be way more open to talking to people who you might not normally talk about because, oh, by the way, the people that you normally talk about that you've hired up till now aren't solving it, right? And that's one thing. The other thing is you just insist on it.
Yeah.
You could go back to your hiring team and go, okay, like, how about we stir it up a little? Who's got a referral? Who's got this? How do you think about this? Where do you go to recruit? Where do you go? Do you, when you look at the resume and you say, this is a good candidate and they're only from Ivy League schools, you're going to narrow. It's just be open, I guess, is the most important thing. And then, like you said, make it important.
Yeah.
Don't settle for just interviewing the same people over and over again. And then, like we said earlier, you might see a really wide diversity of candidates who may not all be perfect for now, but might be perfect for later.
That's right. Exactly. Do we have another question?
Yeah. How do you know how fast you should scale up? I know it's a cliche that you've got to spend money to make money, but I want to expand and grow my company. And I want to know if there's any tricks or tips on when the right time to do this is and how to make sure it's sustainable.
Well, I think it is cliche, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think you want to not just scale up to scale up. You want to grow thoughtfully. Right?
Yeah. I think some people think scale up just means more.
Yeah.
So most people talk about strategy as what you're going to do. And mostly it's planning.
Yeah.
But strategy is what you're not going to do. That's what strategy. And scale is the same kind of thing. It doesn't just mean more.
Right.
It means, what are you scaling? Are you scaling your distribution system? Are you scaling your ratio of potential clients to customers in sales? Yeah. What does scale mean? It's not just bigger.
Yeah, because it's going back to like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Is it that we can't get X, Y, and Z done because we don't have these type of people? Then yes.
And I'm sure you see this in all your startups. I did when I was consulting with startups. I'm like, well, Patty, we need you to come and help us with scale. Why? Because we're going to add 300 people by the end of the year.
Why?
I'm like, where'd that number come from? Well, we have 150 now and we got a new round of funding, so we can double our head count. So we're gonna. And we'll get more done when we add another 150 people. I'm like, no, you won't. You're just going to have another 150 people who are as lost as the 150 that you have. Right? And do you have anybody on the team who's managed a team twice as big? And does every team need to double? And, what's the most important thing that you need to get done? Because that's scale, not more.
Right. Not more. Patty, this was so fun.
It was fun. Let's do more. I love it when we do just you and me. I get as excited about talking to you as I do about some of our guests.
It feels like we're just working together, shooting the shit.
I know. Let's do some more.
Shoot the shit some more.
Shoot the shit some more. Okay. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. And if you want to leave us a confession, just do it. There's the link below in the notes. And see you next time.
Yay.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward and Mick Finnegan. Thank you, Kathleen Speckert, and the whole Edit Audio team.